Whispers of the West Side, Part 1. The Return to the Land. It had been years since Lauren had seen the dilapidated farmhouse that once stood as a symbol of her family's history. The place had been abandoned after her father's mysterious death, a tragedy that left her with nothing but questions and a heavy heart. But when a letter arrived from the city, urging her to sign the paperwork to officially transfer ownership of the land, Lauren knew she had to go back, even if it meant confronting the shadows of her past. Her father, Jack Crowley, was once a man of great repute. He was known throughout the region for his strength, his sharp mind, and his ability to weather the harshest of conditions. But no one spoke of the night he died, not openly at least. It was said to be an accident, but Lauren had always suspected something far darker, something that had been buried in the land itself. Jake Sanders, the town's sheriff, had heard the rumors. He'd known Jack Crowley, respected him. When Lauren came to him, seeking help, Jake was reluctant at first, but something in her eyes, something that spoke of fear deeper than anything he could have imagined, compelled him to act. "I'll go with you," Jake said, his voice firm but laced with caution. "But you need to understand, some things are better left buried." Lauren didn't argue. She knew the risk. The fear had followed her all these years, like an old scar that refused to fade. She wasn't sure what was waiting for her back at that house, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just memories. It was something alive, something that wanted to keep its secrets hidden. Part 2. Echoes of the Past. The journey to the Crowley farm was long and silent. The landscape of Westside stretched endlessly before them, the land flat and dry, punctuated only by the occasional ranch or worn-out shack. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a fiery glow over the horizon. The closer they got to the farm, the heavier the air seemed to grow. It wasn't the heat. It was something else, something invisible, like a weight pressing down on their chests. As the sun sank beneath the horizon, they arrived. The farmhouse stood against the evening sky, its shape half obscured by the overgrown trees that surrounded it. The structure seemed to groan under its own weight, the walls cracked, the roof sagging. The once proud home now looked like a decaying monument to time's cruel passage. Lauren stepped out of the car first, her boots crunching against the dry earth. She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath as if steeling herself for something she knew she couldn't avoid any longer. Jake followed, scanning the surroundings. There was no sound, no birds, no wind. The silence was absolute, oppressive. "You sure you want to go through with this?" Jake asked, his voice low. Lauren nodded, her expression unreadable. "I have to. For my father, and for myself." They made their way up the crumbling steps to the front door. It creaked open with a long, drawn-out moan, as if the house itself were protesting their intrusion. The air inside was thick with dust, and the smell of mildew and rot clung to every corner. The living room was exactly as it had been when Lauren left, except for the faint outline of something she couldn't explain. Footprints, large and uneven, imprinted in the dust. They led deeper into the house, toward the back room. "Someone's been here," Jake muttered, his hand resting on the handle of his revolver. Lauren didn't say anything. She had seen the prints before, but she had no explanation. She turned to him, her eyes wide with dread. "We need to get to the back room," she whispered. "That's where it happened. That's where everything changed." Part 3. The Room of Secrets. As they moved through the house, the temperature dropped noticeably, each breath they took feeling heavier than the last. The walls seemed to close in around them, the oppressive silence growing louder, more suffocating. Every footstep echoed, reverberating through the hallways like a distant drumbeat. The back room was just as Lauren had described it, a small, dimly lit space filled with old furniture covered in dusty sheets. But it wasn't the furniture that caught Jake's attention. It was the symbols. Crude, jagged lines were drawn on the walls in what appeared to be charcoal. There were circles, interwoven lines, and strange shapes that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Jake's heart raced as he stepped closer, inspecting the markings. They were old, too old to be from anything modern. Yet there was something about them that felt unsettlingly fresh, as though they had been drawn only days before. Lauren was standing in the corner, her face pale. Her hand clutched the pendant around her neck, the one her father had given her before he died. It had been a simple thing, nothing more than a worn silver chain with a small, tarnished cross. But to her, it represented everything she had lost. He used to say these were part of something he discovered, Lauren said, her voice trembling. A ritual, something old, but he never told me everything. He was afraid to. Jake's gaze flicked to a small wooden doll resting on a shelf. It was ragged, its clothes torn, and its eyes stitched shut with black thread. Lauren flinched as she saw it, her breath catching in her throat. "That's it," she whispered. "That's the doll." Jake reached out, his fingers brushing against it. The instant he touched the doll, a gust of wind slammed into them, rattling the windows and shaking the walls. The temperature plummeted, and Jake could see his breath in front of him. A deep, guttural voice echoed through the room, reverberating in the very air. "You shouldn't have come back," the voice rasped. Lauren screamed, but the sound was drowned out by the rising wind. The house groaned and trembled as if alive, its walls expanding and contracting, breathing like a living thing. Jake spun toward the door, but it was gone. The hallway, the exit, everything had disappeared, leaving them trapped in a room with only the doll and the whispering shadows. The voice came again, louder this time, and Jake could feel something pressing against his chest. He couldn't breathe. The room seemed to stretch and warp, the shadows twisting into shapes that were no longer human. He could feel them, cold, clammy hands brushing against his skin, unseen presences circling around him, closing in. Lauren was sobbing beside him, but Jake couldn't look at her. His focus was fixed on the doll. It was moving ever so slightly, as though it were being manipulated by invisible hands. He reached for his gun, but it slipped from his fingers as the wind howled louder, drowning out everything else. The door behind them slammed open, and they both stumbled backward, falling into the hallway. It was empty, silent once more. The wind had stopped, and the temperature had returned to normal. But the feeling of something watching them, of something waiting, remained. Part 4, the escape. Jake helped Lauren to her feet, his hands shaking. "We need to leave. Now!" They didn't look back as they rushed out of the house, the door slamming shut behind them with a deafening bang. The farmhouse loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the setting sun. But neither of them stopped to look. They didn't speak as they climbed into the car, speeding away from the place that had once been their home, the place that would never let them forget. Lauren never returned to Westside after that night. She disappeared without a trace, leaving only a note for Jake. "Thank you for helping me face my past. But there are some things that cannot be undone. I'm leaving this place for good, and I think I'll never come back." Jake kept the note, a grim reminder of the horrors they had encountered. The town of Westside would continue to live its quiet life, oblivious to the darkness that lingered just beyond the horizon. But every summer, when the heat became unbearable and the wind whispered through the empty streets, the people of Westside would hear the soft, mournful sounds of a woman crying in the distance. They would never understand what had happened in that farmhouse, but they knew some things were better left forgotten, and some things, once unleashed, could never be contained. That's the end of today's story. You can subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications because I'll be posting stories like this every day.